in the last part of this section of First Light, tell me a little bit more about this picture.
Well, this is the last in our Cairngorms adventure, really.
Yes.
And it's made from the top of the Cairngorm plateau, in the kind of, well, it's not a basin as such, but it's a ridge that connects the summits of two big mountains, the Cairngorm itself and Ben Macdui, which is Britain's highest, lies out of sight on the left-hand side. Ben Macdui is, big as it is, it's big, and that's about it. It's rather featureless, so it doesn't make a
big round topped thing.
Pretty much, yeah. It's huge. Just getting around it takes hours and hours, and not like a Stack Polly or Sylvan or one of those sort of amazing mountains in the west. I actually spent 2 nights in a tent on the top of the plateau here, somewhat below the summit, but still at well over 1,000 meters above sea level. For me, I want to just say that it's got lots and lots of great memories, because the valley that you see plunging off between where I'm standing and these points here is the Larry Grew.
Oh, okay.
So,
right.
which you'll remember from before. And I'm looking at Cairngorm here, and Sgwr and Lochen Wain, I think it is, also known as the Angel's Peak, as opposed to the Devil's Point, further to the south. And Bray Riach is on the right. This is made on the second morning, and it was a very, very cold night. The cloud that had prevailed all the previous days simply evaporated overnight. So naturally, as ever, I was hoping for some sky with some character and cloud and mood and atmosphere, because the previous day there'd been plenty of cloud, so much cloud that there was no blue sky at all and no sunlight. But we went from one extreme to the other. We went from total overcast to totally clear. And it's kind of maddening in a way. I woke up in the morning thinking, oh no, it's a beautiful day.
Gone the wrong way.
So, yeah. However, we went out and to watch the sunrise and enjoy at least the combination of cool tones and of the shadows and the warm early sunlight. And this picture was made just as the rising sun is hitting the rocks in the middle distance here. And it did take a little while to find this sort of area. As a whole, the plateau of the Cairngorm is quite featureless, and it's not easy. There's not a tree for miles and miles and miles. All the trees are such as they are down in the valleys, and the rocks are generally flattened to the ground because of the wind and the action of ice and snow and water. So it's very much a wild, bleak, if that's a judgmental word, but bleak is what people would think of it of environment. It's actually astonishingly beautiful, and unexpected in all sorts of ways. And although it looks lifeless, there are actually numerous animals and birds that inhabit this plateau from time to time, and call it home. And there's also a lot of plant life, although most of it is dwarf, so it's very, very small lichens and very tough grasses and wildflowers in the summer. And you can see why, because in this winter landscape, I think it was made in March of 2007, or 2008. The snow is pervasive, but it's actually frost which defines a lot of the character of the lighting. So although the light looks very, very soft, a lot of that softness is actually a result of the frost sitting on the stones, which brightens them.
Yeah.
So
I was astonished at the sort of glow that's coming from, especially in that centre of the picture there. and it looks like it's coming from the lighting, and you're trying to figure out where's the lighting source for these amazing highlights.
It was literally just the frost picking up the sky, the light from the sky, and that's what's quite nice about that is that well, the sky is not blue because it is sunrise, so it's got quite a lot of colour in it. But if we look at the colours on the stone, almost all of the colour is the colour of light rather than the native colour of the rock. So these oranges in here, let's just enlarge it a little bit. That's actually, I beg your pardon, that does show some native rock colour, but also the sunlight itself gives a lot of that orangey yellow.
Yeah.
You can see a few grasses in here, and there's a bit more sunlight in the middle distance, and especially here. But the immediate foreground is actually still not lit directly by the sun. Just a little bit of sunlight there. You can see it's quite warm in there. That must be a tiny bit of sunlight. And then the shadows are cooler, and the snow, which is lying in the shadows, is, well, blue, as you would expect from the reflected light of the sky. You can see that this looks, to me at least, very much like granite. I imagine it is, and there is a lot of warmth in it, in this rock. There's this sort of pinkish glow to it. It's quite complex, and then that's complicated by the yellow lichens that arise all over the place. So it's really quite a unusual combination of colours there, and
the warmth from the grasses as well in the foreground.
Yes, yeah, just in here, very much lying down from the sort of dead of the year, really. It's very, very frosty, and if we look into the distance, big banks of snow, where the snow's been blown away by the wind. It's partially covered in frost. All the frost helps to lift and lighten the sky, and in the far distance the mountains. And one of the reasons that I headed up onto the Cairngorm plateau was to be able to photograph across to what are probably the only really fairly shapely mountains in the Cairngorms, and that is really Cairn and its surrounding peaks, the Devil's Point and the Angel's Peak. Breirich is very, very high, but relatively featureless, which is not to say one shouldn't attempt to photograph it, but given limited time and resources, there's naturally a temptation to look to photograph places which are going to give a kind of an shape, articulation to the horizon line, and clearly that's what's going on here. And it's that sort of pitching rhythm.
It's an astonishing basin in between those two peaks as well, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, the depth of the valley is profound. I mean, it doesn't quite drop off sheer into it, but it sure feels it when you're on the edge of it, looking over, and you can look down into the Lower Crew, and there it is, this sort of, bottom, U-shaped bottom of glen, which extends for miles and miles in each direction. And it flows out in each direction with a river.
Oh,
so
okay,
it's a true headwater. From a geology and geological field trip point of view, it's an absolutely superb place. You learn so much about landscape when you're there. This trip, I had similar problems to the ones I'd had at Carnlieth on Ben Aglo, in that, again, although it was a year later, there wasn't a lot of snow at that time of the year, and for that time of the year, and there's a lot of very broken tones with the exposed areas of rock and ground, and so you get sort of bands and patches and fragments of rock and snow, and we're always, as photographers, in danger of those sorts of patterns dominating the picture. So the difficulty for me here was to try and find enough structure and shape, I can't think of a better way of putting it, to complement that broken detail in the distance, and yet give enough order for it not to be overwhelmingly busy to look at. And I must say that I realise now in retrospect that in some ways a simple sky was an advantage here. It's very, very rarely I would actually ask for a plain blue sky with no clouds, as you know. But in the circumstances, beggars can't be choosers and so on, this was about as good as it got. And the skimming sunlight was wonderful. Within 5 minutes, once the sun was really up over the yard arm and some way into its kind of path through the sky for the day, it was too contrasty.
Yeah.
So I had a very, very short window of time, and as you can see, I've benefited, I think, greatly from the absence of direct light in the foreground.
Yes.
And I did calculate that because I'd looked at the sight lines from within this area and took the view that if I worked here using this sort of structure, that these rocks in the immediate foreground would not be the first ones to light up.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
In terms of that structure in the foreground, it's very complicated subject to try to arrange, and I think a lot of people have issues with creating some sense of order in conditions like that. How do you approach trying to work out where to, I mean, you can't organise them yourself.
No.
But there must be things you think about in terms of placement of the base of the frame.
Well, I will say, in all honesty, that there are times when you don't really know, whether something's going to work. That wasn't what I was looking for when I was out and about. I was expecting something simpler. I really was. I was thinking, we'll have to use an individual rock or maybe some grasses, even if they're laid over with frost and so on, to create some. I would have expected this to be too busy.
Yeah.
This is not really the sort of thing I would normally adopt as a sort of foreground subject matter. It's a boulder field. It's very, very complex. But when I first passed it, making my way somewhere else, I remember thinking, that's got potential. And it was still well before dawn at that point. So I actually put my pack down and had a little wander around in the immediate area and just came back to this. But it was an instinctive reaction, and I don't know how other people work, but my process is very much to, once I've got into an area that I like, I will then, if I have time, I'll almost explore it exhaustively, trying to convince myself that whatever I finally choose is the best. It's the distillation.
And the best sense of balance.
Yeah, and that's what happened here. Now, I had some. I didn't have second thoughts about it. This is what I settled on, and that was fine. But I wasn't expecting it to be any kind of a masterpiece, and I'm not saying it is, by the way. But I felt it would be a kind of secondary image. In some ways, in the context of this group of pictures that we've been looking at, this isn't one that I discovered looking back, because it's actually in the book, but it's one I had relatively low expectations of.
Yeah.
So it surpassed my expectations, and a lot of that is because the complexity actually works.
Yeah, well, there's global shape in there, isn't there? There's global changes of light inside that complexity.
There is, and there are some also very, very nice details within it. And if I can just emphasise that point, if we take this area in here, I don't know if you notice.
Wonderful pyramid.
Yeah, this little kind of perky rock here, and the pyramid, and this one. So there's a kind of fun thing going on here, and then because this rock here is obviously the cousin of this rock here, so you can read it how you will, but there's individual elements. There's quite a nice little subgroup in here. Where they kind of seem to wrap around this slightly more slabby rock there. So it's a kind of almost like a little stone circle in there. And I was conscious of all these things when I was looking at them, and that's why in the end I selected this spot. I think that the most crucial decision you make with these sorts of pictures is the edges, and that was straightforward enough there. This is where I was scratching my head a bit. I knew I was going to end up having to draw this rock off the edge.
Yeah.
In the end, I've used this element here as a balancing,
Right.
and then it just it steps through easily enough. It's a rocket
The grass is balanced from the bottom right to the middle left as well. There's a balance across those, so it does sort of lead you into the picture from the bottom. Everything stacks up from those three central.
It does,
steps.
and those shapes actually, when you look at it on a kind of macro level, they kind of approximate the way that the mountains interlock in the distance. So I think that they're compatible.
One of the things that really I like when I look at it is looking at the snow in the background. The tonal and colour differences in the snow that create layers. The snow on the left is a cyan colour. The snow on the right has gone to neutral. Snow on the far left of the rear peak is very warm. But inside the corrie there, you've got a whole range of tones from blue all the way to
almost bluey purple
on the right.
to very white, and then with the pink defining on the top. And
it's a fantastic shaping. The way that defines those layers.
Well, it's lovely doing pictures of snow when conditions are like this, because as white it just literally reflects the colour of light. So it naturally creates that sort of richness in the way that it responds to light. So fortunately it also means that you don't have to filter it, unfiltered picture again, and that gives it a kind of a purity as well.
It is the sense of light inside there that really gets it for me. I looked at that picture on the page and it looked three-dimensional to me. It really instantly had depth to it, which I couldn't quite explain until I realised what was going on. Is everything's got a sense of recession in colour and tone. The snow isn't all one colour. So that's
an important point. Is that while this is by no means something you always find, it is helpful if you can draw the space all the way through, at least here as it does into the middle distance. These mountains are in a different plane, so one has to accept that. But what can be sometimes very problematic is when you're on the edge of something and you look out something else, and you're trying to make the foreground and the background work. Here there is continuity, really into the distance, and that really helps. I think you can argue that movement there, is then balanced by the mountains behind, and they feel compatible. There's
no obvious layer between the foreground and background.
No, there's not a barrier. It allows our eyes to take a sort of journey through the picture space, and that works well. I do think also that shape kind of immediately pulls back, and there's quite interesting. It's the light on the left, but that draws that way. So there's quite a nice sort of tension and rhythm in there. So I suppose that it was unexpected in that it was overly complex, and yet perhaps what it proves is that the laws and the rules of composition are sometimes very much there to be broken.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.